From across time and space and throughout the multiverse, listen as multiple generations of geeks come together to discuss the iconic characters, events, and franchises that make up the very fabric of pop culture as we know it. Let Your Geek Side Show presents Then and Now. Hey guys, this is Kitty.
And I'm Chris.
And we are coming to you from the Sideshow Studios in Southern California. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, fans were introduced to a farm boy named Luke Skywalker and a villain called Vader. What started as a single smash hit film became a trilogy, spawning even more films to become an entire saga. Throughout the core Star Wars series, the Skywalker family has been at the forefront of the conflict, leading the way as a galaxy in turmoil desperately sought balance between the dark side and the light. The Skywalker family legacy is an epic one, raising questions of destiny, identity, and whether we are able to determine our own fates within the living force. As the latest Star Wars trilogy draws to a close, let's take a look back across all 9 films. This is the Skywalker Saga Then and Now. All right. Thank you for joining me, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
This is a big one. I will say, actually, we're gonna give like a cool warning to people here. This does have spoilers for the Rise of Skywalker.
Spoilers.
Because we are going to be talking about the whole Skywalker saga, and you kind of can't do that if you leave out the last film of the newest trilogy. So you've been forewarned. You've got a chance to get out now and then come back later. But without further ado, oh my goodness. So we're at the end of, I say 9 films. There have been so many others as well with the animated and the spin-offs, but the Skywalker Saga, 9 films. We're done with it. What are your thoughts initially?
It's been quite a journey, from beginning to end, going, seeing the original trilogy for the first time. Gosh, when I was like, I don't know how old I was, maybe like 8 or 9. Granted, I watched it on VHS at home, the unaltered versions.
Excellent.
And then, seeing that for the first time, I was so just amazed by the sights and imagery and the creatures and the ships. And, I'm all for space exploration. And what's neat about this is that it takes a fantasy side of science fiction, and not so much science fiction, but more fantasy. So
the space opera.
Yeah, exactly. The space opera, and the imagery alone is essentially telling stories that may have already been told, but from a certain point of view, if you will. So, and then with the Skywalker saga, it's really all about this family's struggle with not only themselves, but with their enemies. And I think the key 3 points are deception, defiance, and redemption throughout the whole saga, because you have the deception of Darth Sidious, who's able to not only manipulate the government, but also trick the politicians and the Jedi and have them squabble amongst themselves while this one man and his apprentices try to take control of the galaxy, as their revenge, if you will, because the Jedi destroyed the Sith. So it was all about this deception and manipulation. And then you have the defiance part, which is Anakin Skywalker, the creation of Anakin Skywalker, who not only, defied the Jedi Order, but also ended up...
defied the laws of physics, according to some Marvel comics as well.
So, and eventually, defied the Emperor, and then eventually becoming redeemed with the help of his son, who also defied the Emperor. And in that regard, and when you look at Rise of Skywalker, it definitely has those same elements too, because you have the deception of Palpatine, who's remained hidden on Exegol this whole time, who's puppeteering his plan while he's trying to take control. But you have Rey, spoilers, who is the granddaughter of Palpatine, who I think he may have. It sounded. I've only seen it once, so it's still kind of fresh in my mind.
Are you planning to see it again?
Yeah, I'll definitely be seeing it again. I definitely got to pick up on some things.
There's a lot to grapple with.
Yeah, a lot of grapple to miss, but and the fact that Rey alone, who's the blood of Palpatine, his granddaughter, she's she wants to become this Jedi and try to rebuild the Order, and alone she was able to defy, her own grandfather. And you look at,
which is hard for a lot of people to do, even in a world that is not space fantasy. Like, a lot of people, it's hard to renounce your family in that way.
And I think it was also when you look at Ben Solo, Kylo Ren, who defied his Jedi Order from Luke, and then was part of Snoke / Palpatine, and then was eventually bested by Rey, which I think in there was kind of helped by helped by Leia, who kind of, because there was still good in Ben. So, there's a lot of symmetry involved there with his grandfather as well. So, and that's the nice thing I like about the saga, is that there's a lot of symmetry involved.
Well, yeah. As first of all, I also believe anyone who likes a Star Wars movie, you're a Star Wars fan. We don't even need to debate the true Star Wars fan thing, because my deep dark origin story is I actually I went to D23 2013, and that was the year that they announced that there were going to be new Star Wars films. So up until that point, I'd actually never seen a Star Wars film. And I simultaneously, I committed myself to making a costume from one of the Star Wars films. I made Padme's infamous picnic dress because I thought it was cool and definitely not ridiculous and difficult. But I made that dress. I started to work on it before I saw the film, and then a friend loaned me the prequels. So I started with the prequels, which I know is a cardinal sin in so many people's books. But I loved it so much. I liked the idea of it, and I wore that costume to the D23 movies panel where they announced, like, they did a transmission from Darth Vader, and we didn't get that much more information, but it was like Star Wars is coming. And wearing that costume, having only then seen the prequels, and being part of the ripple of excitement of people going, oh my God, there's going to be more Star Wars. I was so excited. And it was strange because I hadn't seen the original trilogy, not out of a lack of interest, maybe because my family wasn't really big on movies when I was growing up, but because I already knew so much of it. So much of it was the pop culture of the moment. And I borrowed a friend's DVD set for the original trilogy. So unfortunately, I haven't seen them unaltered. But her disc was so scratched from her watching it so many times that in Empire Strikes Back, I couldn't have written it more perfectly myself. It cuts off just before before Vader says, "Luke, I am your father." The DVD scratched, but I was like, I know what comes next. Whatever. I'll just jump to Return. And I eventually did get to watch all of them all together. But so there's a lot of ways people can come into the trilogy, and I mean, they wouldn't number the episodes necessarily. I know chronologically they do, but they wouldn't number them if it wasn't a valid way you could watch the films.
Right.
Which I think is really cool. And to your point about the symmetry of the series, I mean, the fact that they do call it a space opera, I think is much more fitting than just like a sci-fi series or even just an epic. Because in opera and a lot of storytelling, it's cyclical. So you do get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But in that ring, and also referencing like the Ring trilogy opera, or the Ring saga, I don't remember which one it is. There's ways that the different parts will mirror and almost, I think they call it rhyming with each other. So there's similarities that I see in The Phantom Menace, episode 1, with episode 9, but almost in a reverse way. And so obviously a lot of people will draw similarities between like A New Hope and The Force Awakens. And a lot of people thought they were too similar, but that's because the first point in a trilogy, in multiple trilogies, will end up echoing each other. But I mean, for me, with episode 1, you've got the slave child Anakin who's told, though you come from nothing, you are going to be a big player in the galaxy, and you're the chosen one. And there's an acceptance of that, but then the eventual fall from that perceived ideal. Whereas with Rey, she comes from nothing, and then she's told, you are the one who's going to carry on the legacy of the Sith and destroy the galaxy. And she backs down from that, and she says, "I refuse." So you've got the similarity of the person who comes from nothing, and then also we have Luke in the middle there with the person who comes from nothing, who's told that they have a higher calling. And on one side in the prequels, there's a supposed rise, and then he falls, and then for Rey, there's supposed to be a fall, but she rises instead, and then Luke gets to make his own choices. And so it is fascinating, but it is also a bit of a cop-out, I realize as I'm talking, to talk about Rey in that way, because technically she's not a Skywalker, because she is a Palpatine.
Right.
But we don't get the Skywalker of that generation, Kylo Ren. We don't get to watch him the same way. He is the villain from the start, and so there's also more parallels you can draw with that. And he does get a redemption, like Anakin at the end of Return of the Jedi. So there's all these different places where, and as is necessary in basic heroic storytelling, there is a lot of rise, fall, refusal to the call, the denial of something, which makes for a fascinating story all the way throughout. But I think then Rey, I don't know how you felt about it, but Rey's ultimate acceptance of the name Skywalker was interesting, because it almost felt like a fan service moment, in the way that if you grew up with, because she takes that name to honor Luke and Leia, but also because they were the ones who trained her, and so she's much closer to that way of life. Any fan could almost then claim in the real world that they too can aspire, they can be the Skywalker. And I think that's where we get the name Rise of Skywalker, because it's no longer just a person, it's an idea.
Right. And I'm sure Rey wouldn't want to go around the galaxy calling herself Rey Palpatine, because I'm sure if she were to go in the Senate and say like, "Oh, I'm Rey Palpatine," the Senate would be like, "Oh, yeah, no, we've already had one of those. Sorry, no.
You are not the Senate."
Like, yeah, you are not the Senate. So, and, with her newfound identity, not only with her being blood related to Palpatine, and I think it is somewhat fitting to take on the Skywalker name as not just a title, but, almost like a new heir to the throne. And, she, again, like, she defied the Emperor. So I think in her own right, she is a Skywalker in her regard, because, she had the help of Luke and Leia guiding her throughout the journey, much like, Obi-Wan kind of did with Luke. So, I definitely did like, Rey becoming a Skywalker in that regard, and it's very symbolic and very poetic in the end, because, it's all about, deception, defiance, and redemption.
Yeah, so. And just because your bloodline says that you have to do one thing, thankfully Luke Skywalker got the best deal out of it when it was like your father was a Jedi and you can have a lightsaber, and it came with a lot of responsibilities, but there was a lot of, Skywalker wasn't even, Anakin had no father, so there was where does that bloodline go? He's a child born into slavery, right. And that's not a legacy you want to pass down to anyone. But I think. So there is very much and I do love that we get in the beginning of all three trilogies, we get the outcast who is on a desert planet and is destined for something more, whether it is good or bad. But also interestingly enough, with the name, and people are like, "Oh, well, why wouldn't you?" Or like, obviously she wouldn't want to call herself Palpatine, or I think it would have been an interesting choice if either she had just called herself just Rey, as she had been, or I wish we had more time with them, because then we could see her like trying to reclaim the Palpatine name. But I do understand there's probably a big stigma on that. But Leia never went by the name Skywalker. Popularly.
She went by her adopted name from her adopted father, Organa.
Yeah, but she's nonetheless still a Skywalker. But I think there's an interesting thing there with the choosing of identities and choosing your own name. In this universe, it seems to suggest you do get a choice,
right? And Leia's mother, Padme, what's her last name?
Amidala.
Yeah,
Naberi was.
Yeah, So Leia could have taken that name, but she took her and that's actually a good point now that you mentioned the fact that she took her adopted name, Organa. You know, her father was, you know, one of the primary senators involved, you know, during the Jedi Purge who helped form the rebellion. So that alone was kind of like, you know, defiance against the Empire, because
how much more fascinating would it have been if Poe was like, I report to General Leia Skywalker?
Yeah.
Like, I think everybody would have done a double take.
Right. So, and because, like, I mean, if you think about it, yeah, she, you know, I mean, as far as I can tell, like, you know, her in the expanded universe, I think she went by like Leia Organa Skywalker, but pretty vague in that regard. But yeah, it's like, now that I think about it, like, Leia Organa, you know, she had her adopted name. And you know,
I mean, even Ben Solo, we don't get to see Ben Solo himself until until Kylo Ren has fallen, and he once more he takes on that name. So I think it's there's a lot of really nice ways that they played with that, but then yeah, keeping Leia through and through, but Rey takes Skywalker, and Kylo is a new identity. There's a lot of ways that they do play, and I really love that you've boiled it down to deception, defiance, and redemption, because it's just a really nice way to package a lot of the conflicts in the Star Wars universe. I do wish we had gotten to see more of Ben Solo. I know we'll never. There's a nice ambiguity in the fact that we'll never quite know whether his side or Luke's side of the initial conflict between them was truest. But there is a lot of richness to be found throughout. And I know people have. I mean, for a lot of people love the original trilogy the most of all, and I mean it is the core of the Skywalker saga. But I love, for as much as I love the originals, I do love then that they went back for the prequels to give Anakin's and even the expansion we got with the Clone Wars. But I mean that the peripheral material where the characters are included, but not necessarily that's the Skywalker saga. It's a little bit of a gray area, so we'll stick with the trilogies. But giving that emotional weight to Anakin was, I think, a really interesting thing that they managed to do with the prequels for all the successes and failures of that story. Giving Anakin that idea that he also had a calling, but it wasn't an Obi-Wan Kenobi giving him a lightsaber. It was a Qui-Gon Jinn saying, "You are the one who's going to do this great thing." And I bring this up in other Star Wars material that we may or may not have recorded, which I realize that podcast airs after this one. But anyways, timey-wimey stuff is fun. The idea that the balance that the Jedi think is just, the balance Anakin is supposed to bring is that the Sith are eliminated, but that's not balance. And likewise, the Sith are like, oh, well, you're going to help us take down the Jedi, but that's not balance. And so it's interesting to see whether or not we definitively get the balance that everyone's looking for. But I think the idea of what Rey became in the newer trilogy is kind of a step in that direction, because she's got the blood of the dark side, but she's choosing the path of the light side. Right. What do you think about that?
So when I look at this so-called balance within the saga, like I feel like there's this, it's almost like a scale, like power is like teetering on both sides. You know, they're trying to like find that balance, but at the same time, though, you know, with the amount of Jedi, you know, the Sith have to kind of like balance that out, and with that amount of power the Sith have, that like there's someone in the Force that will come and try to like overthrow that power. So like I think it's just this constant balance, and I think like really anyone can be that balance. So you know, it kind of like teeters back and forth, because like, you know, the Sith were so prominent thousands of years ago, and then the Jedi come in and, you know, wipe them all out. But now you have them there. So like they're so prominent on one side, but you know, this one Sith Lord, all powerful and all deceptive, you know, he's gonna take them out. So it's just dwindles to a very few. So yeah, I think
balance is more of an active process.
Yeah,
I think to achieve the total domination, which the Jedi and the Sith both call balance on their sides, is not balance. But I think also the balance that people might have been expecting, because people are like, oh, maybe this sequel trilogy will see the balance in the Force. I think the balance that people are hoping for would ultimately be stagnation, because nothing new. I think it's that idea of where the darkness rises, so does the light, and yeah, I do think in the nature of the galaxy and the world in general, it is that it's a process to maintain. It's also like trimming a tree. Like, it'll continue to grow, and so if you're going to keep the tree well maintained, this is a weird metaphor and I don't know where I'm going with it, but like you can't just do it once and say that's it, because it will grow and it will overgrow, whether or not your tree is the dark side or the light side. And so, yeah, it also gives a sense that, I mean, while we may be done with the core Skywalker saga, there's so much more story that can be told rippling from their effects on the galaxy.
Now, what I like about Rise of Skywalker is that it really, obviously, like, this one feels very dark compared to the other two. Mm-hmm. And it definitely, like, suggests, like, a lot more Sith lore that we could be going into. Like, we know, like, we're probably going to definitely get more Star Wars movies, and I think it would be a way to explore the Sith religion, and the fact that, you know, we focus so much on the Jedi and this one family. Like, there's so much more you can tell within, like, the Sith backstory, and, like, you know, Exegol and all that, and, like, what do those statues mean? Like, are they, like, old Sith lords? Mm-hmm. You know, and
who was in that weird Sith stadium that Palpatine definitely sold tickets to before.
Exactly. and I was reading an article about the visual dictionary of Rise of Skywalker, and in the book where it talked about the Sith troopers, it described the name of the legions of Sith troopers in that fleet. And, like, it was like the 3rd Revan Legion, and then it was like so they're taking Sith lords from the expanded universe, and they're actually making them canon, because I feel like the Sith, like, there's so much created Sith lore from, you know, expanded universe and other legacy stuff that, or not legacy, but a culmination of all this over the years, that I feel like that they may want to. They're definitely, like, subtly hinting that they may want to do more Sith lore, and it'll be interesting to see what plays out in that regard. One
of the most interesting plot points that I think, unfortunately, in the necessity of trilogies and storytelling, and I agree that I first of all, I hope we get a lot more Star Wars film, but I'm sure they will do more. I'm hoping, though, that they lean maybe away from the trilogy format because of the way that it needs to echo with other trilogies, as the precedent was set for this space opera. But one of the dropped threads that didn't quite come to fruition for this trilogy was the idea of the neutral, Force-sensitive person who doesn't necessarily come from a lineage. There's been talks that Finn was maybe going to tell Rey that he was also Force sensitive, which, I mean, wouldn't surprise me, because he does have the lightsaber in hand at some points. And but the biggest part was when we saw that at the end of The Last Jedi with the child who just kind of brings the broom over to himself. And I would really like to see that ripple through the galaxy and do some more media that focuses on those more, I call them more neutral parties, because it's not like you were raised to be a Jedi or you're going to be a Sith. It's this idea that the Force can come to anyone. The Force works in mysterious ways, whether or not you believe in the highly contested midichlorians. But I like that idea, and I would love to see the ways in which maybe once the Force becomes not this mystical thing that only the Jedi and Sith have the understanding of. And I think that would then, I mean, it would lend itself naturally to, like, we could have more Sith lore, and people are like, oh, well, I don't understand what this phenomenon is, and it doesn't necessarily have to lead them into, like, I will become a Sith, or I will do this, I will become a new Jedi. But I think the balance, again, with that rise of power and the checks and balances would continue to come through people who are outside of then the Skywalker family, coming into contact with the Force and developing their own understandings of it or misunderstandings of it. So I think there's a lot of potential. I also have to wonder sometimes, just as a chuckle to myself thing, like how the rest of the galaxy views the Skywalker family. Like, oh, they're at it again. Like these handful of people. How many are there? There's Anakin. I'll count Padme, but only loosely. Luke, Leia,
Ben, and then I guess now you have Rey, who's taken over the line. So
we got less than about a half dozen Skywalkers,
right,
causing all of this turmoil.
and as far as we know, Anakin was probably the first Force sensitive in the Skywalker family, created by the Emperor himself. So
for those of you, for those of you who might not be current or realize, in the Marvel comics, which are now actually considered canonical because Disney, Lucasfilm, Marvel, all of them are one big happy family. And Marvel's comics have been killing it, by the way. But there was a comic that revealed the Emperor did manipulate the living Force inside of Shmi Skywalker's womb to kind of produce this fatherless child, Anakin Skywalker, who it's interesting also then to see that play out with the fact that like the Emperor wanted Luke and wanted Vader to join him, and then when those alternatives failed, he's like, let me call up that granddaughter I have and see how she's doing. It was a very interesting late game reveal that does make some weird wrinkles in the plot, but again, it seems it does have that Emperor feeling where he's like, I'm gonna pick the one person I need, because he's always convinced it's going to be the one person with a certain power that will help him overthrow the galaxy. And
I'm sure Palpatine did have like that like oh crap moment where he realized that like, oh, my granddaughter is still alive, because granted, Ochi, who killed her parents, Palpatine's son. So he must have assumed that like, okay, she must be dead. But I guess when The Force Awakens came out, with Snoke being puppeteered by Palpatine, and then when Kylo Ren tells that there's this girl using the Force, I think that was his realization that like, oh, there's this girl. I wonder if that's who I think it is. And I think that was his moment where, like, because if you think about it, like, the threat to Vader was Luke Skywalker. So the threat to Palpatine was his granddaughter. So, in that regard, I think he was trying to do all he could to not only train Ben, to do what Vader started, but the fact that you have the Rey, the granddaughter of Palpatine, like, she was the one that was gonna defy the blood. So which makes it all interesting when you go back to Ben Solo, the Skywalker blood, how he struck down Snoke, but it was not nearly as big of a moment as when Luke defied the Emperor, and it almost cut Kylo Ren loose, because then he took on his like, I'm going to raise an empire and become the supreme leader. But then it's interesting that how he came back down from that, because that wasn't ultimately his path. But his defiance of Snoke, who was then being puppeteered by the Emperor, it's interesting because that's the parallel, but it also it kind of set Kylo free so that the Emperor could then pursue Rey, because he's like, he's like, I've already manipulated this kid enough, but he's not going to be the one. Right. Which is very interesting. And there was that one moment where Palpatine was talking to Legion General Pride, and he was saying, is like, the Princess of Alderaan has messed up my plans, because Leia, before her death, was able to convert Ben with the help of Rey, and Rey subdued him. And so that definitely changed the Emperor's plans. But of course, he's still going to find a way around it. And, and all of his deception and manipulation was trying to get Rey to, kill the Emperor's bodily presence, so that way he can inhabit her. So, but again, with Ben redeemed, he was able. So in that regard, it's very similar to Luke and Vader stopping Palpatine the first run. So the more I think about it, the more I realize, like, wow, there's a lot more symmetry there. So it plays out very nicely.
And with that, as well as, because you brought up the end of Leia, and then that made me think of the end of Ben. A key part of the Skywalker family, whether or not they're blood related or not, is the belief that there's still good and there's still hope for the family, because we have Padme and Anakin, like, there's still good in him, I know. And then we've got Luke and Vader, and then we have Leia continually trying to reach out to her son, and we have Han Solo even trying to reach out, trying to bring him home. And there was this idea that there's still good in that family line, which I think it's very interesting that's because that's also a key factor in the person coming back. I know for the prequel trilogy, we don't see the payoff of believing that there's still good in Anakin until the original trilogy. But it's that faith that no matter what forces are not pun not intended, the external forces pressing in upon these people to shift their balance and make these decisions, that ultimately, as long as we don't shut them out and say that there's absolutely no hope for them, then there is always a path back. Not necessarily, it doesn't, again, with the balance, it doesn't always have to be the light side, but a path back from wherever they've fallen to.
Right.
Which I think is fascinating. And yeah, there's a lot of that beautiful symmetry throughout. And that's the nature of the storytelling. This is a massive endeavor, and even where Marvel has their cinematic universe where everything's connected, very rarely do they do what Star Wars has done in 9 films with prequels that are interconnected and echo each other, and trilogies and stuff like that.
Now, one thing I that comes to mind is the chaos and then the order that follows between both factions of the Jedi and the Sith. And then you have like this family, this Skywalker name that falls in between that chaos and order. The chaos is the Sith all striving for power, and they're essentially killing each other off, like the master has an apprentice, but that apprentice could have his own secret apprentice, so they're all killing each other and fighting for power.
And then if you're Darth Plagueis the Wise.
Yeah, exactly. So, if like one finds another power, his apprentice is going to do everything he can to take control of that power. And the Jedi, they're trying to establish not only their Jedi order, but order throughout the galaxy and maintain peace. So, and then you have someone like the Skywalkers that are, I think the Skywalker name in itself is the balance between those two opposing forces that, they've been colliding for thousands and hundreds and thousands of years, that like they were trying to keep them from destroying the whole galaxy, if you will. So, it's like order through chaos, and then chaos through order, or however you however you take it.
Organized chaos, like my desk at home. And I think not the last. I mean, we could discuss this for hours, but there's another key factor that I know it's not directly of the Skywalker bloodline, but no Skywalker could necessarily do it alone. And so there's a lot to be said in the values of the people they keep around them. So we've got, of course, like Han Solo, we've got Poe Dameron and Finn. Right. We've got, Obi-Wan and Anakin. It's the bonds that they formed with other people as well that helped them stay on the path. And then when they did fall from the path, it helped them get back to the path, or kind of have a touchstone of like, this is where I was and where I can still be. Because honestly, after watching these trilogies, it takes a special kind of person to put up with a Skywalker's running around the galaxy, I have to save the world kind of thing. Yeah. So those people who stay loyal and true, and like Chewbacca, and then the droids, and I love that the droids have been there for all of it. They're almost as much Skywalkers. I mean, C-3PO himself was made by Anakin, and so having the droids there throughout it all is also a really cool thing. And so these have all been massive storytelling undertakings, and not always successful, but I don't think there's ever I don't think there is a perfect
yeah,
formula. There's no one who's done it who's been successful in every single installment they've ever done.
And it's all generational. It's there's something for everyone within the saga. We want to look at it and interpret it in our own minds, but when we look at Star Wars, it embodies the human imagination. Mm-hmm. So it's all about, like, sure, we may wonder, like, oh well, how come this wasn't answered was because maybe it's open to interpretation. It's like it's all about,
or we'll get a tie-in comic book from Marvel in a couple of months. But
so and it's all about creating almost our own stories and that's why, like, a lot of the expanded universe was created, because you had these fans that wanted to continue telling a story that began in the late 1970s. So it's so rich, and we have the fans to thank for having such imaginations. And just because you don't like one movie, doesn't necessarily, and vice versa. You got to consider the fact that, like, there's something for everyone, and it's such a wide, diverse range of different stories, but all share the same concept.
And I think it ultimately comes down to the title that they gave the original Star Wars film after it became a part of a series was A New Hope. I think ultimately, wherever you come into the saga, whatever generation you're a part of, whichever movies you do or don't like, every new fan, I think, is a new hope for the series. Every bit of storytelling, it gives us that sense that, like, we can, whether we face the deception of a villainous force, or we deny what we're supposed to be, whatever people tell us we're supposed to be, we have that chance to seek our own destiny. We have our chance to redeem ourselves from any past failings. And again, I as much as people kind of felt one way or the other about it, I think Rey taking the name Skywalker and the film being called The Rise of Skywalker is the kind of beautiful little bow on that idea that if we grew up with these characters, or we just joined them, if we're learning under their tutelage and we take those lessons to heart, then we're all a part of the Skywalker saga at the end of that day.
No, it's been one heck of a ride, and there's so much more we can go into, and and I think, like, the Rise of Skywalker alone has everything that's culminated up to this point. I think it pans out nicely in the regard that it between the struggle of essentially light and darkness. It's that old battle, if you will, of light and dark, good versus evil. So, and
that whether it is in a galaxy far, far away a long time ago, or it's the present day, like, that rings true for every person, I think.
Right. And in times of darkness, the smallest, dimmest light will shine the brightest in the darkest of shadows. So you have these characters that essentially come up out of nowhere during dark times, and strive to extinguish the darkness, and and the darkness is trying to do the same, where they're extinguishing the light. So and that's all part of the scale of light and dark, Jedi and Sith.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, that is what taking the Skywalker name means for anyone in this universe. While Star Wars fans have as many opinions on the series as stars in the galaxy, it is clear that the adventure of the Skywalker saga is at the core of every fan's love for the series. Whether it is a call to a higher destiny or having the strength to confront and overcome fear in all its forms, this series of films has shown us what it means to be strong with the Force. In over 42 years, generations of Star Wars fans have been there for midnight premieres, galaxy-shaking plot twists, spin-offs, speculation, and more. While this is by no means the end of Star Wars, it does represent the end of the epic core of the series that has shaped so much of popular imagination. Despite this, we can all rest easier knowing that no matter what happens, the Force will be with us always. Thank you for joining us. This has been the Skywalker Saga Then and Now. Do you enjoy listening to Then and Now? We are proud to bring you pop culture content completely ad-free, but that doesn't mean we don't need your support to help keep us going. Please take a moment to leave a 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcasting platform and help spread the word about our podcast. We welcome fan feedback. Email us at podcasts@sideshow.com with your thoughts and suggestions for how we can make our shows even better. Plus, tune in for our full network of pop culture podcasts. See if your fan favorites make the cut in the Geek Culture Countdown, a bi-weekly podcast featuring pop culture top 10 lists. Hear exclusive interviews with celebrities and pop culture industry leaders as they let their Geek Side show in Look Who Showed Up. Join comedian Jeff May and his special guests as they discuss anything and everything in Sideshow's Sideshow. Then, get all the latest pop culture news with our daily briefing, a 2-minute breakdown of the biggest geek headlines perfect for your Alexa or Google News briefings. We wouldn't exist without your continued support. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to let your geek side show.